Tigers in Disguise. Ajahn said that, excepting the few who had visited large towns in the region, most of the hill tribe people in Chiang Mai had never seen monks before. Early in his travels, Ajahn and another monk went to live in the mountains about 1.5 miles from a hill tribe village. They camped in the forest, taking shelter under the trees. In the morning, when they went to the village for alms food, the villagers asked why they had come. Ajahn said they had come to collect alms. Puzzled, the villagers asked him what that meant. Ajahn explained that they had come to collect offerings of rice. They asked him if he wanted cooked rice or uncooked rice. When he said cooked rice, they got some and put a little in each of their alms bowls. The 2 monks then returned to their camp and ate the plain rice. Lacking faith from the very beginning, the villagers were very suspicious of the monks. That evening the village headman sounded the bamboo clapper to call everyone to a meeting. Referring to Ajahn and his disciple, he announced that there were now 2 tigers in disguise staying in the nearby forest. He said that he had yet to determine what kind of tigers they were, but they weren't to be trusted. He forbade the women and children to enter the forest in that area, and men who went were warned to go armed and in groups, lest they should be attacked by the 2 tigers. As it happened, Ajahn was beginning his evening meditation at precisely the time the announcement was made to the village community. So, Ajahn, who was the object of this warning, was also privy to the whole affair. He was deeply saddened by the senseless accusations, but, instead of feeling angry or discouraged, he felt only ineffable loving compassion for the local villagers. He was concerned that the majority might naively believe such slanderous talk, and therefore be burdened by its dreadful moral consequences until they died, at which time they might well be reborn as tigers. Early the next morning he informed his disciple of what he had seen. Last night the village headman assembled everyone and announced that we are tigers in disguise. We were both accused of being tigers who are disguised as monks in order to deceive them into trusting us, so that we can then destroy both their persons and their properties. Because of this, they have no faith in us at all. If we were to leave here now while they still harbor these negative thoughts, they may all be reborn as tigers when they die. A grievous gumma indeed. So, for their benefit, I think it's incumbent on us as monks to remain here and put up with the situation for a while. We must endure the ensuing hardships until they've changed their attitude, before we move on to another location. Not only did the villagers distrust them, but groups of 3 or 4 armed men often came to keep an eye on them. Sometimes they stood watching from a distance, but at other times, seeing Ajahn walking meditation, they came closer and stared at him from the end of his walking path, or from the side of it, or even stood right in the middle of it. They glanced around, surveying the whole area for about 10 to 15 minutes, then left. This surveillance routine continued day after day for many weeks. The villagers showed no concern whatsoever about the personal welfare of these 2 tigers. They were not interested in whether or not they had enough food and other necessities to survive. Thus the living condition of these 2 tigers were difficult in the extreme. The most they received on alms round was plain rice. On some days it was just barely enough to satisfy them. On other days it wasn't nearly enough, even though they drank a lot of water with it as well. Since there was no cave or cliff overhang in which they could take shelter, they lived and slept under the trees, putting up with exposure to the sun and the rain. When it rained in that area, it tended to rain all day. After the rain abated and things dried out a bit, they went looking for dry leaves and grasses to construct a makeshift thatched roof, giving them some limited protection against the weather. It provided enough cover to survive from day to day, albeit with much discomfort. When it rained heavily, they sheltered under their tent umbrellas with the cloth sheeting hanging down around them as protection against the cold wind. Often the rain was accompanied by strong winds that came howling down out of the mountains, blowing their umbrellas, soaking their belongings, and leaving both monks drenched and shivering. If it happened during the daytime, they could at least see what they were doing while collecting their requisites to look for some cover. But when it occurred at night, the situation was extremely trying. They were unable to see, even as the rain poured down and the cold wind blasted through the trees, causing branches to break off and crash down around them. They were never sure of surviving this onslaught of rain, wind, cold, and loose debris flying at them from all directions. During such hardships, they just endured the best they could. They had to abide the heat, the cold, the hunger, the thirst, and the uncertainty of their existence, while they waited for the villagers' mistrust to subside. Even though they received only plain rice, their supply was, at best, erratic. Drinking water was hard to come by, so they had to walk down to the foot of the mountain to fill their kettles, carrying the water back up to serve their daily needs. Despite such an impoverished existence, the villagers showed no sympathy for their plight. In spite of the hardships, Acharyaman felt free of anxieties and responsibilities as his meditation practice progressed unhindered. He took great pleasure from listening to the calls of the various wild animals in the surrounding forest. Seated in meditation under the trees late at night, he constantly heard the sounds of tigers roaring close by. Curiously, those huge tigers rarely ventured into the area where he was seated. Occasionally, a tiger did approach Acharyaman. Perhaps suspecting him to be wild game, it snuck in to have a look. But as soon as the tiger saw him make a move, it leapt off into the forest in alarm, and was never seen again. Nearly every afternoon, 3 or 4 men came to check them out. They stood around whispering among themselves without a word to Acharyaman, who, in turn, ignored their presence. When they arrived, Acharyaman focused his chitta on their thoughts. They, of course, never suspected that he knew what they were thinking or what they were whispering about. It's unlikely they even considered the possibility that someone could be privy to their thoughts, which they indulged in unrestrainedly. Acharyaman focused his attention on everyone who came. As was to be expected of a reconnaissance party, he discovered that they were primarily looking to find fault with him in some way. Instead of taking precautions against such findings, Acharyaman responded with great compassion. He knew that a majority of the villagers were subject to the corrupting influence of a small minority. Acharyaman remained at this site for many months, yet the villagers persisted in trying to catch him at suspicious doings. Their sole purpose was to find him doing something that would confirm their worst fears. Although they were sincerely committed to this, they never tried to chase him away. They merely took turns spying on him. The villagers must have been surprised that despite many months of continuous surveillance, they still couldn't catch him doing anything wrong. One evening, while sitting in meditation, Acharyaman became psychically aware that the villagers were assembled for a meeting concerning his case. He could hear the village headman questioning the others about the results of their surveillance. What had they been able to determine so far? Those who had taken turns observing the 2 monks said the same thing. They could find no evidence to confirm their suspicions. They were worried that their suspicious attitude might be doing them more harm than good. "Why do you say that?" the headman wanted to know. They replied, "As far as we can tell, there's nothing in their conduct to confirm our assumptions about them. Whenever we go to check them out, either they are sitting still with their eyes closed, or they're calmly pacing back and forth, not looking here and there like most people do. People who are tigers in disguise, poised to attack their prey, would hardly behave like that. These 2 monks should have exhibited some sort of incriminating behavior by now, but we've seen nothing so far. If we keep treating them like this, we may suffer the consequences. The correct approach would be to speak with them to find out about their motives. Presuming their motives to be sinister may well reflect badly on us all. Good monks are hard to find. We have enough experience to tell good monks from bad ones. These monks deserve our respect. Let's not hastily accuse them of treachery. To find out the whole story, let's go speak with them. Let's ask them why they sit still with their eyes closed and why they pace back and forth. What are they searching for?" A decision was reached at the meeting to send a representative to question the monks. In the morning, Acharyaman spoke to his companion. "The villagers are beginning to have a change of heart. Last night they held a meeting about their surveillance of us. They have decided to send someone here to question us about their suspicions." Just as Acharyaman foresaw, a village representative arrived that very afternoon to question him. "What are you searching for when you sit still with your eyes closed, or pace back and forth?" Acharyaman replied, "I've lost my butto. I'm searching for butto while sitting and walking." What is this, butto? Can we help you find it? Butto is the most precious gem in the three worlds of existence, a jewel of all-pervading knowledge. If you help me find it, that'll be excellent. Then we will all see butto quickly and easily. Has your butto been missing long? Not long. With your help we'll find it a lot faster than if I look for it alone. Is butto something large? Neither large nor small. It's just the right size for all of us. Whoever finds butto will become a superior person, able to perceive anything he wishes. Will we be able to see the heavens and the hells? Of course. Otherwise how could we call it superior? What about our dead children and our dead spouses? Can they be seen? You can see anything you want once butto is yours. Is it very bright? It's much brighter than hundreds, even thousands of suns. The sun is not able to illuminate heaven and hell, but butto can penetrate everywhere, illuminating everything. Can women and children help search for it too? Everyone can help. Men, women, young and old, all can join in the search. This superior butto, can it protect us from ghosts? Butto is superior in countless ways. It is superior in the three worlds, Gamaloka, Rupaloka, Arupaloka. All three of them must pay homage to butto. No being anywhere is greater than butto. Ghosts are very afraid of butto. They must bow down and worship it. Ghosts are frightened of people who search for butto too, even though they haven't found it yet. This butto jewel, what color is it? It's a bright, sparkling jewel with countless colors. Butto is a special asset of the Lord Buddha, a gleaming aggregate of knowledge, not a material thing. The Lord Buddha bequeathed it to us many years ago, but since then it's gone missing and we no longer know how to find it. But its location is not so important. If you're trying to find it, what's important is to sit and walk thinking butto, 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 exclusively within your heart. Keep your attention focused within your body, not letting it wander outside. Fix your awareness firmly on the repetition of butto, butto. If you can manage to do this, you may even come across butto before I do. How long must we sit and walk searching for butto before we find it? To begin with, sit or walk for about 15 to 20 minutes at a time. Butto doesn't want you to spend too much time searching for it yet. It's afraid you'll grow tired and so be unable to keep up with it. Losing interest, you will not want to search any more. Then you'll miss it altogether. This is enough to get you started. If I elaborate any further, you won't remember it all, thus jeopardizing your chances of meeting butto. With these instructions in mind, the villager returned home. He didn't take leave of Acharyaman in any special way, because that was not the hill tribe custom. Deciding that it was time to go, he simply got up and left. As soon as he arrived at the village, everyone gathered around to hear what had taken place. He explained why Acharyaman sat still with his eyes closed, and why he paced back and forth. He was searching for the precious gem butto, and not, as they had presumed, because he was a tiger in disguise. He then explained Acharyaman's brief instructions on how to find butto. Once the villagers knew the method, everyone, from the headman on down to the women and older children, began to practice, mentally repeating butto. Several days later, something truly amazing happened. The Dhamma of the Lord Buddha arose clearly in the heart of one of the villagers. While mentally repeating the word butto over and over again, as Acharyaman had suggested, one man in the village found Dhamma. His heart attained a state of peace and calm. A few days earlier, the man had dreamed that Acharyaman was placing a very large, bright shining candle on top of his head. The moment Acharyaman set the candle on his head, his whole body, from the head on down, was brightly illuminated. He felt overjoyed as the radiance spreading out around him illuminated the surrounding area as well. Soon after he attained this state of tranquillity, he went to tell Acharyaman about his achievement, and about the amazing dream he had prior to it. Acharyaman then gave him additional instructions on how to proceed with his practice. As it turned out, his progress was very quick. He was soon able to psychically know other people's thoughts. He informed Acharyaman of this very matter-of-factly, in the forthright manner typical of forest people. Some time later, this man declared to Acharyaman that he had examined Acharyaman's citta and had clearly seen its characteristics. Playfully, Acharyaman asked if he could see much evil in his citta. The man answered without hesitation, "Your citta has no focal point whatsoever, only an absolutely incredible radiance shining within. Your preeminence is unrivaled anywhere in the world. I've never seen anything like it. You've been here about a year now. Why didn't you teach me about this right from the beginning?" "How could I teach you? You never came to ask me any questions." "I didn't know you were a supreme master. Had I known, I'd have come for sure. Now we all know you're an extremely clever person. When we came asking you why you sat still with your eyes closed, and what you were looking for as you paced back and forth, you told us your butto was lost, and asked us to help you find it. When asked to describe it, you said butto is a bright, sparkling jewel. But in truth, the real butto is your heart. The missing butto was simply a clever ploy to persuade us to meditate on butto so that our hearts could become bright like yours. Now we realize that you're a supremely wise person whose only desire was for us to discover the supreme butto in our own hearts, thus ensuring our long-term welfare and happiness." The news of this man's attainment of Dhamma spread rapidly through the community, further arousing everyone's interest in butto meditation so that even small children took it up. Their faith in Acharyaman thus reinforced, their reverence for his teaching steadily increased. No one ever mentioned tigers in disguise again. From that time on, the man who had learned to meditate carried Acharyaman's alms bowl back to his forest retreat every day after the alms round. After Acharyaman finished eating, he would then seek advice on his practice. On the days when he had business to attend to, he told someone to inform Acharyaman that he wouldn't be available to carry the alms bowl. Although quite a few men and women in the village learned to meditate, this first man was the most accomplished. When people are satisfied, everything else naturally falls into place. For instance, previously these people were not the least bit interested in how Acharyaman ate or slept, or even whether he lived or died. But later, when faith and respect arose in them, those things that previously were scarce soon became plentiful. Without having to be asked, the villagers joined forces to make him a walking path. They also built him a hut and a platform on which to sit and have his meal. When they came to help, they disguised their praises of him in reproachful tones. "Look at that walking meditation path. It's all overgrown with vegetation. You'd have to be a wild boar to penetrate that thicket. And yet you still insist on walking there. You're really weird, you know. When we ask you what the path is for, you say it's a place to search for butto. I've lost my butto. When asked why you sit still with your eyes closed, again you say you're looking for butto. Here you are, a supreme master, yet you don't tell anyone about it. You're the strangest person we've ever known, but we like you just the way you are. Your bed is a carpet of mouldy-smelling leaves strewn over the ground. How could you stand it all these months? It looks like a pig's lair. Looking at it now, we feel so sorry for you we could cry. We were very stupid, all of us. We didn't realize what a wonderful person you are. Worse than that, a few of us accused you of having sinister motives, convincing the rest to dislike and distrust you. Finally, now the whole village trusts and reveres you." Acharyaman said that when hill tribe people decided to trust and respect someone, their belief was heartfelt and unequivocal. Their loyalty was unconditional. They would sacrifice their lives if they had to. They took what they were taught to heart, conducting themselves accordingly. As they became more familiar with the method and more proficient in their practice, Acharyaman taught them to steadily increase the amount of time they spent doing butto meditation. Acharyaman stayed with those people for over a year, from February of one year to April of the following year, until he finally left. However, because of his great compassion for them, taking leave of them was very difficult for him. They were very reluctant to see him go. They assured him that, were he to remain there until he died, the whole community would arrange for his cremation. Those people were willing to put their complete trust in him out of a deep sense of love and devotion. Unmistakably, they had seen for themselves the good results of his teaching. And to their credit, they were smart enough to see their own faults as well. Once they came to know him as a truly virtuous, highly respected monk, they realized their mistake and so begged his forgiveness. He forgave them, later telling his disciple that their amends were complete. This meant that the two of them were then free to go somewhere else. But taking leave of them was no simple matter. Acharyaman said that it was moving beyond description to witness their affection and deep devotion as they beseeched him to stay. Having heard that he was preparing to leave, The whole village came out, weeping and pleading with him, until the entire forest was disturbed by the commotion. It sounded as though they were mourning the dead. While explaining his reasons for leaving, he tried to comfort them, assuring them that such distress was unwarranted. He counseled self-restraint, which is the way of Dhamma. When they calmed down, seemingly resigned to his departure, he began to leave his forest retreat. Then something totally unexpected happened. All the villagers, including the children, ran after him. Surrounding him on the path, they proceeded to snatch away his requisites. Some grabbed his umbrella, his bowl, and his water kettle, while others clutched at the robes he wore or clung to his arms and legs, trying to pull him back again. Acting just like children, they were determined to not let him go. Acharya was obliged once again to explain his reasons for leaving, consoling them until they calmed down. Finally they agreed. But no sooner had he started walking off than the crying began, and they rushed to drag him back again. Several hours passed before he eventually got away. Meanwhile, the whole forest was disturbed by noisy scenes of hysteria that were heart-rending to watch. The initial epithet, tigers in disguise, meant nothing to them then. In its place had arisen deep reverence and attachment for a man of supreme virtue. In the end, these hill-tribe people couldn't hold back their emotions. As they gathered around him crying and pleading, their many voices merged into a crescendo. "Hurry back to visit us again. Please don't be gone long. We miss you so much already, it's breaking our hearts." Having arrived in the area surrounded by suspicion and dissatisfaction, Acharya departed amid emotional scenes of affection and attachment. He had managed to turn something unseemly into something beautiful, so enhancing its value immensely, as befits one ordained as a disciple of the Buddha. The Buddha's disciples never hold grudges or look to blame others. Should anyone dislike them, they will try to help that person with loving compassion. They never take offense at other people's misbehavior, nor do they harbor feelings of animosity that could lead to mutual recriminations. A heart full to overflowing with loving compassion inspires faith in those ablaze with kilesas by providing them with a peaceful, dependable refuge. A heart of such loving grace possesses virtuous qualities that are unparalleled in the world. Later, when listening to Acharya tell this story, we couldn't help sympathizing with the hill tribe people. We formed in our minds a clear image of those chaotic scenes in the forest, as though we were watching a movie. We could imagine the villagers' potent faith, ready to sacrifice anything for this man of supreme virtue. All they asked was a chance to bask in his aura of loving kindness, thus continuing to enjoy a life of prosperity. So they cried and pleaded with him, clutching at his arms and legs, pulling on his robes and other requisites, until he returned to the small eating platform with the thatched roof that had been a source of such contentment. Though an incredibly moving occasion, the time had come for him to move on. No one can possibly negate the transient nature of the world. The driving principle of constant change keeps everything moving. Nothing can halt its progress. For this reason, when the right time came, Acharya had to leave, though he fully understood the position of those faithful villagers who were so emotionally attached to him. Although Acharya was once labelled a tiger in disguise by the hill tribe people, it is well known that he was, in truth, a pure one, who existed as an incomparable field of merit for the world. Acharya left that mountain community in order to follow his natural inclination, to be of the most benefit to the greatest number of people. Buddhism is a priceless inheritance that has always been an integral part of our very existence. But perhaps it too could fall prey to insidious accusations of being a tiger in disguise, much in the same manner that Acharya did. It could end up being severely damaged by people whose views are hostile to Buddhist principles and traditions. In truth, this process has already begun, so we should not be complacent. If we fail to fulfill our obligations, we may forfeit this inheritance, only to regret it later. Acharya followed the way of Sugato. When living deep in the forests and mountains, he was constantly of service to the hill tribesmen, or else the devas, brahmas, ghosts, nagas, and garudas. He was always compassionately assisting the world in some way or another. In human society he taught monks, novices, and lay people from all walks of life without exception. People everywhere sought him out to hear his instructions. They all gained an enormous benefit from his teachings, always delivered in a thorough, coherent manner that would be hard for anyone else to equal. While he lived in the mountains of Chiang Mai, the hill tribe people received great joy, listening to his Dhamma discourses in the late afternoons. Later at night he taught Dhamma to Devas from various levels of existence, always responding to their many inquiries. Teaching Devas was a heavy responsibility, since it was difficult to find another monk with the same psychic skills to stand in for him. Teaching people was a responsibility that could be delegated to others. At least the people listening would gain enough understanding to derive some benefit if they made the effort. Acharya Mun's relationship with Devas of all realms was of primary importance to him. So his biography is interspersed with stories about them at different times in different places, right to the very end. Not so long ago, I went to pay my respects to a Vipassanaga Martana Acharya of the highest caliber, a senior monk with an exceptionally kind, gentle disposition, who is greatly revered by monks and lay people all over Thailand. When I arrived, he was discussing Dhamma with several of his close disciples, so I took the opportunity to join them. We began by discussing various practical aspects of Dhamma, eventually coming around to the subject of Acharya Mun, who had been his teacher. In the past, he lived under Acharya Mun's tutelage in the remote mountains of Chiang Mai, training with him at a forest retreat that was several days' walk from the nearest town. It's hard to find words to describe the many remarkable, amazing stories he told me that day. I shall relate the ones I feel are appropriate here, while the others I shall skip, for reasons I explained earlier. This Acharya said that, besides his undoubted purity of heart, Acharya Mun also possessed many unique abilities that inspired awe in his students and assured their vigilance at all times. He said he couldn't possibly remember all of the strange, unusual stories he had heard from Acharya Mun. So I urged him to tell me what he could remember. His words would serve as a memorial, a source of inspiration for future generations. This is what he said. Acharya Mun knew everything I was thinking. What more can I say? I felt as though I were on a tight leash day and night. Such was the vigilance I applied to observing my mind. Despite my best efforts, he could still catch my errant thoughts, publicly exposing them for everyone to hear. My meditation was actually quite good while staying with him, but I couldn't always prevent stray thoughts from arising. We should never underestimate the mind's ability to think incessantly, day and night, non-stop. How many of us can catch up with our thoughts long enough to restrain them effectively? So I was constantly on guard, for he was better at catching my thoughts than I was. Sometimes he brought up thoughts that I'd forgotten having. Suddenly I was made to recall thoughts that had long since passed. I asked the Acharya if Acharya Mun had ever scolded him. He told me, occasionally he did, but more often he read my thoughts, then used them as a way of teaching me Dhamma. Sometimes other monks were listening as well, which really embarrassed me. Fortunately, if other monks sat listening, Acharya Mun never revealed the name of the offender. He merely spoke about the relative merits of the thoughts in question. I wanted to know why he thought Acharya Mun scolded him sometimes. He said, "Do you know the word putujjana? It means a mind denser than a mountain of stone, careening out of control. It doesn't consider whether thoughts are good or bad, right or wrong," which was a sufficient reason for him to give a scolding. I asked him if he felt afraid when Acharya Mun scolded him. Why shouldn't I have been afraid? My body may not have been shaking, but my mind certainly was. I almost forgot to breathe at times. I have no doubt that Acharya Mun truly did know the minds of others. I experienced it myself. He could literally collect all my thoughts, then confront me with them later. For example, from time to time I rather foolishly thought about going off on my own. If such a thought occurred to me at night, early the next morning, as soon as I encountered him, Acharya Mun immediately started lecturing me. "Just where do you think you're going? It's far better here than anywhere else. It's best that you stay here with me." And so on. He never let these thoughts pass undetected. "It's more enjoyable here. Staying here and listening to the Dhamma is better than going off on your own. He never would consent to my going. I believe he was worried that my meditation practice might deteriorate, so he tried to keep me under his tutelage the whole time. The thing that terrified me about him was day or night, whenever I decided to focus my chitta's attention on him, I saw him staring back at me. It seemed he never took a rest. There were nights when I didn't dare lie down, because I could visualize him sitting right in front of me, scrutinizing my every movement. Whenever I focused my chitta on external objects, I invariably found him there looking at me. Because of this, my mindfulness was constantly alert. As his students, we were forced to be mindful. Following him on alms round, we carefully kept our thoughts under control, restraining our minds from straying beyond the confines of our bodies. Were we careless, we could expect to hear about it, sometimes immediately. Consequently, we exerted mindfulness over our thoughts, at all times. Even then, he could usually find something to lecture us about, and always with good reason. Inevitably, at least one monk among us gave Acharyaman cause to speak out. During the evening meeting, Acharyaman might speak in a scolding tone about some rather strange affair that seemed to make no sense. As soon as the meeting adjourned, the monks would quietly ask around to find out whose thoughts he was censuring that day. Eventually, one of the monks confessed that, as strange as it might seem, he actually had been thinking such nonsense. Living with Acharyaman was a wonderful experience, for fear of him always promoted a mindful attitude within each of us. This Acharya told me that when he first arrived in Chiang Mai, he went to stay at one of the local monasteries. Having been there less than an hour, he saw a car pull into the monastery grounds and come to a stop right in front of the hut he had just moved into. When I looked out to see who had come, there was Acharyaman. Hurrying down to receive him, I respectfully asked why he had come. He replied without hesitation that he came to pick me up. He said that he knew the night before that I would be coming. I asked if someone had informed him that I would be arriving in Chiang Mai. He replied that it was beside the point how he had learned of it. He knew about it and wanted to be here, so he just came on his own. Hearing that, I became apprehensive. And the more I considered the implications, the more apprehensive I grew. Later, when I was living with him, all my fears were confirmed. If our minds were free of conceited opinions when we received his Dhamma discourse, then we became pleasantly absorbed in listening. His entire discourse was Dhamma, pure and simple, and it engaged our full attention more than anything else we had ever heard. On the other hand, if a monk listened half-heartedly, burdened by the weight of worldly thoughts, then we soon perceived fire in his discourse, and the offending monk would promptly feel the heat. In giving a talk, Acharyaman was not concerned about whose kilesas his words might disturb. His Dhamma rushed to confront the kilesas at just that point where they were most prolific. Occasionally he did identify a monk by name, confronting him directly. "Why were you meditating like that last night? That's not the right way to meditate. You must do it this way." Or, "Why were you thinking like that this morning? If you want to avoid being ruined by such harmful thinking, then don't think like that again. Why don't you think and act in ways that the Lord Buddha has taught us? What's the matter with you? We're here to train ourselves in the way of Dhamma in order to get rid of wrong attitudes and erroneous thinking. We are not here to indulge our thoughts, burning ourselves with them the way you've been doing." Those who wholeheartedly accepted the truth lived contentedly with him, and he didn't say much to them. But any furtiveness caused him deep misgivings, as though the offending thoughts were fire burning him, and he would suddenly make a surprising comment about it. If, however, the monk realized his mistake and changed his attitude, then nothing further was said, and the matter rested there.